Hey everyone, it's Justine and welcome to another video for Ellen Hutson. Today I am working with the brand new February release, specifically the Mondo Gerbera Daisy, and I am going to show you 3 ways that you can color it using watercolor, Copic markers, and colored pencils. So first of all, I have to say that I'm going to use 3 different sheets of paper because depending on your color medium, you want to make sure you have a paper that interacts well with the medium. So for the colored pencils, I'm going to be using a Canson mixed media paper, and this is specifically listed as being good for colored pencils. The Copic color, I'm going to be using 80-pound Neenah Solar White cardstock. And for the watercolor, I'm also going to be using a Canson watercolor cardstock. The reason being is, of course, you're going to have different depths of the paper, so the Neenah is going to be very smooth, the watercolor is going to definitely be textured, and the colored pencil one is going to be somewhat in between. It has a tooth to it, meaning a texture, but it isn't as great as the watercolor. I'm also going to be using different inks. So for the Copic marker one, I'm going to be needing to use this Tuxedo Black Memento ink. And for the colored pencil as well as the watercolor, I'm going to be using some VersaFine Black Onyx ink. Black Onyx ink is waterproof. You do need to give it a second to dry though because it is pigment, and you could always hit it with your heat gun if you're impatient. Also wanted to mention that I'm stamping today with my Misty stamping tool with white stickers on it, so you might not recognize it. And the reason why I'm using this is you'll see because of the texture in some of the papers, I do need to stamp it multiple times. I also think my Tuxedo Black ink pad may be getting a little on the dry side, so it took a couple of stamps there to get a great impression. Alright, let's get straight into the coloring. I'm not going to show the entire coloring process. I think it's important that I don't because you'll be here for literally 1 full hour. That's how long it took me to color all 3 images and could have taken me a whole lot longer if I'd put more detail into it. The water brush markers that I'm going to be using today are from Altenew, and these are brand new, which means you have to unscrew the cap here, take out that yellowish green band, and then put it back on top. So pretty easy to get these started and ready to go. Then once they're ready to go, you just need to push on the barrel of the marker itself until the color shows up into the pen itself. And you'll see me here just giving it a quick squeeze to make sure that I have enough. And I'm using just the back of my cardstock to just test it out here to make sure everything's okay. Now these water brush markers are new to me, however I have used Jane Davenport's before and I'm pretty sure that's the same concept. So you just go in and color all you want. The nice thing I like is that it's nice and controlled, the color coming out of here, and very, very vibrant. Then you can go ahead and add water if you like. It's completely up to you and you can get that into a paler shade and more of a watercolor tone. So I'm starting out here by putting orange all along the base because that's going to be my darkest area. I'm going to be using a few colors here from the set. This is the Spring Garden set from Altenew, so it just has the current set here at 10 markers, and I'm going to be using Warm Sunshine, Autumn Blaze, Limeade, and Moss. So Limeade and Moss, of course, being for the actual stem of the flower. And I'm also going to go in with some of my Altenew watercolors for the center because it doesn't have a brown in this particular set. So I'm now going along all the edges and I am looking for petals that are laying on top of other petals. So petals that are laying on top of other petals are going to give a shadow on the petal underneath. So making sure to get those in there. And then I'm going in with some yellow from the top. Now I'm not a watercolor expert in any way, shape, or form. I do enjoy it now and again, not all the time, but I do like images like this where they're pretty easy to color. Even easier to color is, of course, heat embossing your image with a embossing powder because it's going to keep those ridges of those embossing powders are going to keep all the color in one area. So I find for beginners it's perfect, like myself, but I thought I'd give it a try with the ink this time. So I'm going to go ahead and use water, and I continue to use water to blend in that yellow and orange together. And really I'm just going to go ahead and use very minimal water, and it's already probably dry in most areas by the time I work my way around the flower. So I'm just going to go in and continue to add layers to my flower here, and layers really are what's going to build everything up. So if you're not satisfied with the way your flower is looking, it's just not done yet. And that's pretty much my tips on the watercolor for you here with the water brush markers. They're generally user-friendly and easy for beginners. Now, as I mentioned, there was no brown in the set, so I grabbed my Altenew watercolor palette, which I haven't used either yet. Just seems I have way too many watercolor projects for the amount of times I actually do watercolor. I'm just coloring in the center here with the water brush that comes with the palette, which is really nice. And I think these little half pans here are a perfect size for beginner watercolor because it's a good chance to get to know which ones are your favorite and which colors you use most. And lastly here, I'm going in with that limeade as well as moss to do the stem. Obviously the moss is going to be more up towards the end of the stem where it's closest to the flower because that's going to give it the most shadow. So that's the end result, and I'll go into putting the card together at the very end. My next card here uses Copic markers, and this is probably the one I've done the most practice in as far as coloring is concerned, and it really is truly practice. Like, I was the kid in school that got a C in art, who always rushed to complete everything, who hated every minute of it, and I never got to learn color theory or anything like that. And it really is practice. Practice flicking, practice different things, concepts like shadows and cast shadows and all that stuff. And it seems really complicated at first, but through taking classes with fellow team member Sandy Alnock, as well as taking online classes with Kitten Clowder, I have definitely think I have a good handle on some of the basic concepts now, and my coloring improves every time I do it. And it really is a practice makes perfect. It is something that you can learn, and I think that's super important. And of course, you don't need to own Copic markers to do great coloring. Colored pencils are a great alternative, or cheaper versions like Spectrum Noir are great as well in case these are not in your budget. So many alternatives, and remember, buying the best markers are not going to guarantee that you're going to be the best colorer, and that's something that I've had to learn the hard way, that it really is just practice. So I went in with YR27 and I did all of the shadows first. I'm now blending them out with YR24, which gives it this nice golden orangey with a brown tinge, and now lastly I'm going in with that vibrant yellow that we know so well from sunflowers with Y15, and I'm covering all of those areas. Now, I think it looks pretty good right now, and I could have easily stopped there. In my opinion, when I'm doing cards, it's not necessarily meant to be the biggest work of art and go into a museum, so I usually stop there. However, I thought I would just go in and add some more shadows in there, just reinforce those, and the more you layer and the more layers you do, to a point, of course, the more depth you're going to get, the more detail you're going to get, and the better your image is going to come out. So it's really up to you how much time you want to spend on it and what you want the end result to look like. The last thing I needed to do was go ahead and put in a stem here. I'm using YG 91, 95, and 97. These are my favorite very natural green looks for things like stems and leaves, and give it a really beautiful natural tone. The last thing I'm using are Prismacolor colored pencils. These are my absolute favorite. You're welcome to pause the screen there to see which colors I used throughout the process. As far as the coloring of all three flowers go, the colored pencils did take me the longest, and that's because you really have to build up your layers. I find Copic coloring and colored pencils, the properties of the coloring itself, are quite similar as far as how you draw in cast shadows and how you color, except for the colored pencils, you have to watch your strength or the pressure that you're putting down on your pencil. Your hand should not hurt when coloring with colored pencils. If it does, then you're probably pushing too hard. The point of the colored pencil, you'll notice it's so light right now and you're thinking to yourself like, oh, that's too light. But the point is to keep on layering, and oftentimes I'll do 3 to 4 layers on my cards when I'm doing it. And I believe for this particular version, I did 3. And the reason is you're going to push down the tooth in the paper naturally with no pressure really on your hand, and that's going to fill in those really white or pale areas. So once again, going through with all of those cast shadows, so that means when the petal is sitting on top of another petal, it's on top technically, which means a shadow would be cast underneath, and that's how you figure out what a cast shadow is and where to put them. Now moving ahead, I'm still on my first layer here, and I'm just building up that color slowly but surely and adding in more of yellow tones versus the orange and the brownie colors that I had before. And these Prismacolor pencils. There we go. They are quite highly pigmented, so I find that they do give really plenty of good coverage, and I really enjoy using them. So as I'm finishing up my first layer here, I'm going to go in with my second layer, and I'm going to do pretty much the exact same thing as I did before, but I'm going to darken and extend some of those colors depending on the color that I'm going for. And you're going to see here as I'm coloring, because I'm in fast motion now, you're going to also see how much more color that brings in, and just by watching a couple seconds of the video and adding that second layer. And you can see that the more you build up, the easier it is to get a very beautifully colored design. I think out of the three of them in the end, this one was probably my favorite, even though I could tell I made a couple of errors on it, but overall I really liked it. Now I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to skip into the center, because I like using this texture technique in order to maintain that texture from the sunflower. So when I go in for this, what I end up doing is I end up doing almost like little half circles, and I do them all over randomly with one color brown. I do it again with a second color brown, and you can almost make like a little spiral as well. That's just going to build up the texture, and then I go in with my last and final lightest one and keep continuing going in. I thought about going in with some white on the petals, but I didn't like the way that it was looking, so the last thing I needed to do, of course, was color the stem. And you can see my first layer there not looking the greatest, but once I add in the second layer here, it's looking much better. Now I'm just going to show all of the images to compare. So you have that watercolor one, which looks very much like a blended piece of work. The colored pencil one, in my opinion, has the most texture, and then the Copic one I think is really beautiful as well. So I'm going to go ahead and die cut these, and the reason being is that the color cardstock that I used, okay, so sometimes I spilled, so I got a little watercolor onto my Copic one, and the watercolor cardstock as well as the colored pencil cardstock is not going to be the same shade of white as my card base. And so if you get that really beige tone on top of a white card base, it's going to look a little bit funny. So I thought it would be best to just die cut them and then add them onto that really crisp white base. And that's going to, of course, give it as well a really big pop, especially in that color being against such a bright white like the Neenah Solar White cardstock. I'm using Ultra Bond liquid adhesive from Thermoweb here to attach these onto each one of my card panels. That measures 4 by 5.25. So here is a final look at all three of the cards with their small sentiments that I used from the stamp set itself. Thank you as well as hello. So I hope you're inspired to color your flowers in multiple ways and perhaps use some alternative colors like I did than the traditional ones that they're supposed to be. Be sure to check out another video from Ellen Hutson here as a suggestion and to subscribe to the YouTube channel. Until next month, bye for now.